Okay, we're going to stamp a request composition here based on the Bloomsbury Bridge 221G stamp and Clad with Sun Large. Okay, now these are two stamps that someone purchased for the purpose of a sympathy card. Okay, so I think we can see kind of the direction that they want to go in here. You know, we have a sun up here, and this cloud. This bridge right here, surrounded by flowers. Okay, so just in general, sympathy cards. We're talking about, you know, something with a little bit of serenity to it, or a lot of serenity to it. And when we're talking about those types of things, we're talking about light. Okay. Now, that's one of the biggest things with imagery, okay? A lot of times stamps are outlines, and what people do is they approach kind of an outline style of stamping process with the idea that you stamp things out and then you color them in, okay? Designs that are more tonal like this already have a lot of the shading and the forms within this space, so it's not an outline of a bridge that where you fill it in and just color everything completely one uniform tone, okay? And that goes the same thing for things like sky imagery, okay? So, that being said, we're not going to stamp out our imagery just all in black and then color it in. You can kind of get the idea of what that might look like, okay? It would be a little bit more harsh and just really contrasty, okay? You want things to be light and airy when we're talking about kind of a serene feel to something. Okay, so that being said, let me show you what we would do here and go about in trying to achieve this kind of feeling, okay? All right, now, just in general, I mean, you can approach this in different ways, but the person with the request envisions these flowers here being yellow in hue. You can do them whatever color you want. Purple, pinks, blues, whatever you want. I would keep them probably uniform, but that's not hard, you know, a hard set rule or anything like that. Okay, now I can stamp this one out in black if I want to, but I don't think I want to do that, so I'm going to stamp it in a dark brown, okay? Alright, now I'm stamping this on a glossy cardstock. You can stamp this on a matte cardstock. Just keep in mind that the contrast will be a little bit softer on matte cardstock than on glossy. Glossy just tends to hold the ink saturation a little bit more than an absorbent paper like a matte. Okay, so when we're going to stamp this out, we're going to stamp it out kind of towards the bottom of the scene because we do have the sun to put up here. And she also wants kind of a bank of grass in the background, which I think is a good idea too. She has a really good idea for a composition, and she just kind of came, you know, composed these types of elements in her head, but didn't know kind of a good way to approach it. And I think in terms of achieving the mood that she was after, certainly had no problem in coming up with the composition here. Okay, so as we stamp this out, we can see there's light and dark within this space. Things look a little bit more dimensional than they would if these things were just only outlines, okay? So we have to keep that in mind when we start approaching color, be it colored pencils, chalks, colored pens, whatever. We need to retain some of that, distinction between light and dark, okay? So that being said, I've already drawn in a lot of shadows, and this is what I talk about in all my videos, you know, it's kind of a reiteration of what's already on the designs in terms of our approach with coloring, okay? Alright, so we'll talk about that when we get to it. Alright, now this is a sedge filler stamp. She has a different grass texture from another company, which is absolutely fine, but so I'm just using sedge filler to fill in right here, okay? And I did that in green. I have a feeling that I'm going to use greens in this space right here. So if something's going to be green then stamp it out in maybe a dark green, like grass or something like that. If you're stamping blue water, stamp your water in blue. These are things that are reflective of the light that's within your space. All right? Now, if I was doing a sunset type of scene, where the light being cast is a warm tone, you know, dark pinks, purples, oranges, etc., my concept is that you stamp that light source in the color that it is casting, right? Doesn't that make sense? So if it's going to be a sunset scene, then you would stamp out your light source in something out of that color scheme. If you're stamping a blue, cold, chilly night, you know, with a full moon, you could stamp that in black and do it in, you know, color in blue, but you could also stamp it in blues because it is the light source, okay? So that is the general concept there. Now, she wanted blue skies, blue clouds, okay? That was her notion there. So I am going to stamp this in about a medium blue. I don't want to stamp it too light, like something like this, because this is a delicate image. There's not a lot of solids in it. It's mostly just condensed dots and lighter forms of dots, so I have to stamp it in a little bit of a darker tone for it to show up. All right? Stamping all these flowers right here, I feel like I don't have allergies, but suddenly I feel like I got hit by allergies or something. All right, now here's my little trick here on sky figures. You blot the edges like this, okay? And when we're talking about light, right in the center there where that sun is, I'm going to blot that off a little bit, okay? So that it stamps lighter. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to depict light within that space. So if it's drier, it's going to stamp out a lighter version of that blue. All right, now this is what they call local color too. It's when somebody stamps or colors something kind of in their notion of what those things look like. So suns at sunset or sunrise are yellow, you know, because you see this golden light. They call that the golden hour in photography. It's when you shoot those settings in that time frame. All right, so here's that sun. I might have taken off a little bit too much right in there. I should have left a little bit more. But anyways, we see this light in there, and it already looks like it's glowing, you know, a little bit more so than if we stamped it all in like a harsh black, okay? But let's go in here now, and let's see how we can approach this in our approach on lighting. All right, now let me grab a few pads here. We have blue skies, so one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to work through some blues here. We're going to sponge in some colors. A gigantic stack of memento pads that are about to fall. It's always the pads that I'm looking for are always on the bottom of the stack. Never fails. Okay, so starting with light tones and work into the darker tones, okay? So start light and work dark. That'll be the same, you know, just in general if you're working with kind of additive inks that are kind of doing layers. Oxides, dye-based inks, alcohol inks, whatever. Alright, so that's my sun right there. Now, her notion was, going back to the color of it, if you're stamping these clouds in blue like this, that would give kind of more of an indication of something like in the daytime, right? You look up in the sky, you got blue sky, right? And that's what we have here. Now, I mean, it would certainly be, you know, oops, this is a little bit inky with black ink. Let me get a clean one. We can stamp this in kind of a sunset or sunrise type of color scheme, and that would be perfectly kind of in theme of the spirit. My pad seems a little bit dry. Summer sky. Re-inker. I add quite a bit of my re-inker fluid to my lightest colors because my lightest colors I tend to get the most coverage from. Alright, now, here's the thing. Here's the difference between coloring and lighting, okay? In coloring, if we're thinking about these clouds, we would probably color in the whole thing, alright? But when we're talking about lighting, what you're doing is you're just kind of coloring in the shaded portions of it. Well, how do you know where to do it, you know? Well, and there's no set answer to that, but just in general, what you do is you hit the areas where there you see some shadows in there, okay? Now my shadows on that cloud with sun drawing are very delicate, okay? So just in general, for me, I'm just hitting this whole perimeter out here, right? So now look at what this did to it. That's a lot different than what that would look like if I just colored all that completely uniform. So if you're doing that with pens or something like that, what you do is you start off with a really light shade of blue, alright? And then you hit the darker blues kind of out here on the perimeter, so it goes from dark to light, alright? Now that's just the same thing what we're going to be doing through most of this here. Alright, now this summer sky is a really, really light blue. Alright, now this grass here, the way that they approach the grass, I had them send me out what they were working on, and I really liked what I saw, but they just did too much. So we'll show them how to kind of really incorporate the objects and what those objects are depicting into their scene. And I'm going to add in a couple other special effects in here too that I think will really be conducive for the overall spirit of this, you know, theme of this card. Alright, so this is grass. Now I'm just adding some blue down here because it'll relate to that color above, but look what I do. I add it on both sides here, and I leave this place light so that it looks like it's depicting light, right? We don't color it in all the same thing. We don't just say that's grass colored all in green, right? Okay, so we'll carry that idea down here. I could have put some of that sedge filler down here as well. But we're kind of getting our lighting scheme established here first, before anything. Alright, now, let me put a little bit of on this bridge too. I'll leave a little bit of it light though, okay? It's just a little bit of a shade on there. It will be brown, okay, don't worry, it's not going to be the blue bridge, but I'm giving these areas something to relate to the light up there. It's this kind of this elegant, you know, kind of lighting scheme that we're going after. We want to go for something really... And a sympathy card's really, you know, there's a very specific thing, usually. Unless it's just someone, you know, that had a, you know, a different personality we don't want to, you know, we want to do humor or something like that to kind of match the personality of the individual. But just in general, you know, what we're going for is something kind of a serene nature. Alright, so here we go here. I have these light beams coming out, which means you don't just color in the whole thing. It means you kind of leave some of those areas light. Here's the emanating area, so I just keep pointing it in like that. And we get this more of a feeling of what they call crepuscular rays. It's those emanating light beams coming out in perspective. We look up in the sky and it looks like they're coming at an angle. They're really not coming at an angle. They're parallel with each other, believe it or not, but they look angled. Okay, but you see what's going on here now? We see kind of the lighting coming around. Now, when you're first starting this out, it can be kind of a strange concept because, you know, it's not just coloring outlines. And that's one of the biggest things that people have to kind of get used to. They're used to doing a lot of outline image coloring, kind of more like a coloring book style of format. They're coming up with their own compositions when you're doing stamping. But what you're left with is kind of this outlined, kind of more of a stained glass type of thing, you know, with a lot of outlines where it's very, you know, clear as far as where one image ends and the other one begins because they're defined by lines. It's linear. But in these tonal types of things where we're depicting things like light, it's a little bit different. And You don't have to look at it as something that's too complicated though either, because I could color this all in the same thing like that grass up there, right? And then I can go with a darker green or something like that. I can color in that whole thing with blue. What are we doing here? We're not doing all of it, we're doing less, right? So in reality, instead of filling in entire spaces, you're doing less, okay? Now, you don't have to worry about, well, let me see, is it supposed to be light over there? If the sun's here, would it be light over here? Or would it be light over here? It doesn't matter that way. You're just leaving areas kind of light within each object or space. This is a sky space. I'm leaving that light around the sun. That's very apparent. Down here in the meadow, I'm leaving it light right here in the middle. In this bridge, I'll kind of leave it a little bit lighter, but we'll vary it a little bit just so it's not boring. Okay? So just don't color everything in. And when people are first starting out, you know, if they accidentally kind of eradicate their light source, no big deal. Just, you know, when you do it again the next time, just watch out. Where it usually happens is when people get into their darker tones, they get the feeling of adding color and whatnot, and then they get comfortable with that, and then they keep adding it where, you know, exactly where they added maybe the lightest color. See, the lightest color I have go in towards my light source or illuminated light a little bit more, but when I get into the darker tones like this, see, I'm a little bit more perimeter oriented. I don't go in quite as far because I'm going with the darker ink, and it's supposed to be light emanating from there. So your darker colors, you just kind of stay a little bit more perimeter oriented, okay? So you do that too if you're going with like pens or something like that, all right? What you're doing is you're kind of creating a little bit of a vignette of sorts. Okay, now why am I adding blue down in my grass? Well, blue is a component of green, right? So I am going to blend green right over the top of my blue in this process before I'm done. Now that's really coming around now. It's my kind of definition of light is starting to really show, isn't it? Because I've made this area darker, so doesn't it look like light is coming from above there, like this heavenly light or something of sorts? Okay, now I've been talking about it. Let's move into our green tones. Now, you don't have to bring all those blues down in there if you don't want to, all right? If it kind of feels funny to you and it, you know, you're kind of questioning it the whole way, you know, you can move into your greens. But I would recommend that you do put at least one of your lightest blues down, be it in pen format or something, you know, a really light shade. Because sometimes when you do really distinctive areas of color, blue, green, brown, yellow, and those colors don't appear in any other section of your scene, it can look really fragmented in the end because you don't have any of that related. Let me show you, like an example would be, let's say we're standing next to, I don't know, on the sidewalk or wherever, the ocean, and there's this beautiful sunset going on, right? Reds, oranges, yellows, whatever. And you're wearing a white shirt or something like that. That white shirt in that kind of sunset twilight area zone, right, with that cast light, your shirt wouldn't be white like this paper right here. It would be showing some of that light on here. It's just as if I put a yellow film over the top of a flashlight. If I flashed it there, that's going to be yellow, okay? So that being said, that's why I bring some of the, whatever colors are up in your sky, bring some degree of it down into these other elements, okay? And what you'll have is a little bit of kind of lighting continuity. It's not really lighting though, it's just color continuity, but it represents cast light. Alright, so does that make sense? And like I said, in scene stamping or something like this, when it comes to colors, it just means that you bring some of those colors down there. I have this brown bridge that I'll put in here. I'll bring some of the beige probably into the grassy area. And there's some of the blue from the sky in the bridge, right? It's very subtle, but it'll kind of tie it all together. It doesn't look so disparate. Is that the word? Probably pronouncing it wrong, but anyway. All right, pear tart. So I'm working through a series of greens. See, I kind of added that warm green down there. Some of it's getting in my flowers, but so be it. What you do is you get kind of this reflective quality happening in things. This green almost looks yellowish, so actually I am bringing some of this into my flowers. I think that'll be good. This is a real yellow-green color, so these flowers are going to be amongst my grass. These types of flowers like this on this design are a really good opportunity because with whatever color scheme you're working in, or you know, you have people or something like that wearing a certain color, what you do is you kind of create that relationship within this given piece by coloring those flowers accordingly. So if someone's wearing, you have a figure in here and they're wearing a purple jacket, then color these, you know, some variations of violet or something like that. It creates continuity again, you know, from repeated relationships within a given piece. So patterns, you know, in that case it happens to be color. Alright, so that was pear tart. Let's go into the bamboo leaves. If you're working through pens, blend them in a little bit. See that little area in there? It's getting a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to keep away from that area, and I'll stick to the outer edge like this. So if you go a little bit too dark in some area, what you do is you make the area around it a little bit darker, and when you do that, then what does that seem? By contrast, it seems lighter, so just keep working it. Alright, let's start moving up into some darker greens. Alright, let's see, I do have another memento darker green. It's a cottage ivy. You can do these same type of things. The process is, you know, application process is different as well as the paper, but, you know, you can do something like this with colored pencils. What you're doing is you're just oscillating your lighting. Your use of a shade, maybe, to define lighting. Alright, see that green up there? See how different that green looks now? It looks like this is completely floating, right? But what we'll do is we'll bring some of this brown into that green out there so it doesn't look so kind of foreign and unrelated. I always use browns up in my grasses, just because I don't like this just straight green look. I don't think it looks real to me. And it's a little bit too, I don't know what the word would be. It's a little bit too, I don't know. It's like AstroTurf or something like that. It's too fake. You know, grass doesn't look like that color right there. All right, peeled paint. This is a little bit more of an aged looking green, right? As all the distress inks kind of have that aged type of spirit to their hue. So I think what they do is they add, I don't know what they add to it, a little bit of brown maybe to everything or something like that. It just kind of dirties it up a little bit, a touch. Alright, that looks a little bit better. I'm kind of using it sparingly. Alright, this one's a Marvy Pine Green. Okay, a little bit on the edge. Ooh, that one looks pretty dark and bright. It's brighter than I thought it would look. No, that must be an... Oh, that's not a... Okay, that's number 4. I thought the pine green's a little bit more kind of earthy. I might have ran out of that pad. Okay. I'll have to do another re-inker blank Marvy pad with that color. Alright, so adding this in, trying to... I'm getting into some of my flowers, but that's alright. Peeled paint. I don't know if, did I use that already? Gosh, I already forgot. Okay. Or I just used it right now. What am I thinking of? Oh, I was thinking of the bottle green. That was my next color there. I lose myself in my scenes, which isn't great when I'm doing like a demonstration like this, but anyway. Alright, so adding this in. I'm kind of adding this in little areas so it's not just one big slathering of continuous value of this given hue, okay? So you can see right here I'm kind of just hitting this, oops, in my shadow areas right there. Where's the shadows? Well, in the designs you can see where it's darker, okay? Like this. So just kind of be observant. You don't have to know, you just have to see. Okay, so you can see it kind of darker in there. And when I get into my darker tones, you just kind of reiterate it in there. But don't try to, don't color everything out kind of uniformly. Kind of hold back a little bit. So remember, it's not doing something completely different, it's just doing a little bit less. I know it's a little bit more than that, but it's not too much more. That's the general concept, and if you kind of stick with that, you'll be just fine. Oscillate things. Now, people don't see things this way either, I know it, but it's nevertheless what someone's doing. But let's say someone is, stamping out some kind of thing, and then there's a little bit of a shape like this, right? And one of the things that a lot of people do is let's say this is, like a dress on someone or something like that. What they usually do is they take their markers or whatever and they color that area in, okay? Alright? Now, one of the things a lot of people do in conjunction with that space there is they'll do it much better than this, but what they do is they put a little bit of tone around on the edge, right? And I know they don't see it this way, but in a sense, what they're doing, they usually have this blended in like this a little bit or something like that. So you hit the perimeters like that. I know you're seeing that as coloring, though. You don't see that as lighting, but what you're saying here is you're having something front lit. So what you do is you have an area that's light, and it goes and it blends into this darker perimeter, right? And that looks like the sides recess, right? It's lighter in the front, and it looks a little bit more three-dimensional. That's all you're doing here. It's darker up here, and it's lighter in the middle. So you're just working it around other areas. It's darker out here, lighter in the middle. I've left a ray here, but you could, you could put that framing out there or something like that. So instead of kind of objects, like clearly defined hard line objects, what you're doing is you're just kind of defining those areas in kind of a slightly more ambiguous space, okay? It's not that ambiguous. There's sky up there, there's grass around this object right there, but that's all it is. And that is your lighting, okay? Alright, so we're going on with a distressing tea dye here. It's kind of entering in some of these brownish tones. Alright, now when you start getting into this, if you want to retain some of that light, don't color everything out, okay? Oscillate it a little bit. Let me show you what I mean by that. Here's this bridge right here. Do we color in that whole thing? Well, you could. I mean, this is a very light shade right here. But I think it will be better if we add some in some area, okay? And leave it as is in another area, okay? So what boards you leave out and what, you leave, what you color darker, it's all up to you. I just colored, I just kind of left a little bit light in here, but it looks like the light is hitting it now, right? And it's because I didn't tone the whole thing out. I've just retained some light. That's always what people are confused by too, when they see an end scene. If I have something that's light somewhere within the design, they often wonder, well, how did you get that light in there? You know, because everyone's always used to coloring whole spaces completely, okay? Well, with lighting for us, we just don't ink everything out. You just retain that light area. Okay, so this is not really coming together yet because we have a lot of different areas of color, different tones of it, okay? But it will come together. You just kind of stick with it now. All right, now that, well, let's see, that was antique linen, tea dye. Yeah, the walnut stain's a little bit dark, but let's go ahead and use that. I'm using that. I'm just throwing these out there because I know a lot of people have, you know, just, I don't know, you might have the entire Distress Ink line, but I know a lot of people have them, so let's use some of these. I'm kind of hitting it in the shadows. I'm kind of having my applicator on an angle like that. Alright, this walnut stain is really dry. Oops. I colored, I think, a little bit more, but that's alright. Okay, now see those little rails on the side of this bridge? I'm going to leave them kind of a little bit lighter for the most part. I'll tone in a little bit just so it's not just stark white. Okay, you see that? Retaining some of it. See how it really pops out? Now see how there's a shadow right here? Well, where do you shade in? Okay, well, you just kind of reiterate the shading that's on the design. So if it's dark, then kind of bring in your light and medium tones in there in addition, okay? But do you see where that now is? Now that bridge is being illuminated by the sun because there's some light on it, okay? And it's really no more complicated than that. Just retain some areas and don't approach them kind of absolutely uniformly. And that's like this. I mean, here we see this. Is this wood here? It's the same color right here as it is right here, right? But then when you turn it and it's influenced by light, this is darker here, it's lighter on the top, there's a little shade right here. It's not all the same, right? So we'd add in tone here if this was a two-dimensional object and we were trying to depict kind of the forms. My hand here is all, you know, I don't know, it's not uniform in color or whatever, but for the most part, but you can see the shadows over everything, so everything's an oscillation of light and dark. Just don't color everything. And again, for the most part, it really doesn't matter what you leave light and dark, just have that kind of interplay within your space. Alright, so that is that. That brown looks pretty good. Let's bring some of this walnut stain. I call it brown. It's kind of a rich, warm brown. And what we'll do is we'll bring that into this grass around here. So it looks a little bit more earthy, okay? That grass, it's not so kind of electric green, alright? Unless you're going for something electric green, you want something with impact and, you know, super bright and whatnot. For me, I like it a little bit more earthy and kind of mellow in terms of the intensity. I like the richness, but I also want it a little bit more mellow. And I don't know, for me, usually the grass isn't kind of the star of the scene. It's usually something else. So I just like to have the grass as a component and not standing out so much. Alright, so that was that. Alright, this is just your number 6 brown Marvy. I really like this color. It tends to bring everything together for me. I mean, there's other colors that can do that, but those are just in the pads that I happen to have. So you see I'm adding it down here around the bridge. But I can edit some of it in the bridge too. And what am I doing? I'm hitting those shadow areas that I've defined before. I'm kind of doing this type of thing right along that rail. You know, like that. Okay. It's getting pretty dark in there for this brown. And this brown I always kind of see as being a little bit lighter, but it is adding some pretty good value into this. Not that I want everything dark, but if I want certain things to stand out a little bit more, then I have to take the areas around them and make them darker. And I do want this to be kind of a real strong focal point, you know, carrying the viewer forward like that. Okay, I want it nice and rich, and flowing, and try to be elegant, you know. Alright, this is a light green. I don't know if I want to use that, but yeah, why not? Let's add a little bit to that grass. It won't look light green or liming green. It's just a little bit of a brighter tone that will sit kind of, it'll look like it's underneath these darker tones. It just makes it a little bit more rich. See what I'm doing overall this thing is I'm kind of layering colors. You can do that in all kinds of different media. Dye bastings happen to be transparent, but you can certainly do that with colored pencils, you know, where you texturize something over the top of one another. You can do it in pastels. You can do it in alcohol inks. Alcohol inks are transparent. Okay, but anyways, see, I'm warming this piece up a little bit with this brighter green, okay? And I think it looks a little bit more friendly and alive and kind of in that spirit that we're kind of going after. Alright, so let's see what we have. That was green. There's a little bit of my blue here. Let's hit this area up here a little bit more with some additional blue. Okay. I'm just making this area up here a little bit darker so that it's not quite so different looking than the values that are down here, okay? And as a matter of fact, I'll bring some of this blue in the sky and land, just to create a little bit more of a relationship between those two spaces. Okay, here's another blue. It's a little bit of a darker blue. It's the Marvy blue. Yeah, it's getting me a little bit darker. Especially up in the sky. Can't really see it too much down here because that green's pretty dark already. Okay, look at that. It's a little bit more serene, isn't it? Okay, so I've been talking about things like pens. Pens are the perfect opportunity for, you know, some additional tones. Let me clear this off here. Okay. Start off very light, okay? And see, I can get into certain areas that, you know, kind of a sponge applicator might not be as conducive for. This is very detailed. I can get into these areas and coloring kind of more of the shadow areas and whatnot. Bring some of this into my grass and work around some of these flowers if I want to. Again, this is very light in value. Okay, and here's a blue, if you want to bring in some blue up in your sky. The light beams in here radiate out, so I can kind of come in like this and kind of go in that same direction. Don't tone everything out, don't just color it all out, right? We still want that to be nice and light in the middle. Okay, let's see this one. It's a little bit darker though, right? So if I want to do that, kind of always kind of pointing in, taking my strokes towards that light in the same direction, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, so I'm always kind of going, if this is my light source, then I'm always kind of, you know, doing my streaks in that direction like that, okay? So the end of this stroke is kind of tapered like that, thick to thin. And just turn your page. It's hard to do this, okay? See, I just keep my hand like this. Okay, and I flip it kind of like this. Okay. That was blue, right? I can add some of this down on my bridge and reflect some of that light down there. It doesn't look pure blue where I go over my brown with it, but it's subtle. It can create a little bit more of a relationship between this bridge and that cast light up there, or the light source. Okay. Let's do that too with this one. This one was the lighter blue. Okay. All right. Do we see the value in keeping some of that bridge light though, like that? See that? It looks like it's reflecting that light source. I mean, you can go with whatever colors you want. Just, you know, keep in mind your general lighting scheme and kind of your lighting with, you know, specific objects. Kind of hit them in the shadow areas with your tones. Okay, so let's see here. Yellow flowers. Okay, now let's see what I can do here. I don't want my yellow flowers to be too kind of overwhelmingly bright. Let's see, here's one called pastel yellow. This one's called pale yellow. Here's a apricot. Not yellow, but, you know, when you see, like, yellow flowers, they're not all just one color, right? I mean, you can see it right here. This is a yellow pen, right? There's my cap. I know I have that studio lighting on there, but if I go like this, I mean, like that yellow in there is a different shade than the yellow out here with the bright light on it, right? You know, even that little thing of our barrel, the I don't know, the reservoir of ink. It's not just all one yellow, right? There's a darker shade, you know, where it's in shadow, or if I go like that. So variation, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and start coloring some of these. But why not leave some of them maybe a little bit lighter? You can get more coverage on some of them. Creating kind of a relationship, right? Putting some of this yellow in the green. Now, I'm not going to put it up in the sky. She was thinking about light yellow beams, but I think we're just going to leave that as that. Because I'm going to show you something that affords us if we don't color that in a color and we stay with white light. All right, now this one's a much brighter yellow. See that next to that right there? Sorry. Okay, there we go. It's really quite bright, so as a matter of fact, it's so bright it kind of stands out too much. So I'll just blend that in, right? Alcohol pens you can blend right in. But we'll get some of this color down there. Kind of start off with, you know, before the blending process, that's what I mean. Alright. It's too electric yellow, isn't it? That's what our... Well, let's see what I can do with the apricot. I usually go in with kind of a lighter version of the color. You can certainly use your blending tool though, but I usually use a lighter color of that hue to blend in. So if it's dark blue, then I'll blend with a light blue. You don't always have to grab your clear blending tool, you know. Alright. Yeah, maybe I can use a little bit of a stronger touch over here. Let's go back to kind of a pale version of that. Here's pale yellow. A little bit more of a bold application like that. See, it's really quite light. I mean, I can go like this. You know what I mean? It's not really any big deal. Don't do that, but you could if you're going so light. You just kind of, if you want to flesh something in a little bit more, you can kind of work it a little bit more. I think that's looking really, it's starting to look really cheery now. See, it's all about kind of layering. At no point in time is it like this big, bold thing that's just kind of filling in there, okay? So it's not kind of precarious either. All right, so let's take a look here. There was something I was going to do. Oh, I thought, you know, birds kind of lend themselves to a certain type of feeling of tranquility. I think we'll add some of those in there. But we'll also have some really nice light beams coming out that way, and I might add in some foreground. No, this is the composition that I've been asked for, okay? But let's add some additional things in here, okay? But to do that, I have to kind of add in some additional forms before I get to those special effects. Now, I would do those effects on the scene like this anyway, but I want to add them in now because, for one thing, I'm going to be adding in pigment ink over the top of this just to kind of mellow it out a little bit and to give it some atmosphere and some kind of a deeper, emotionally complex look to it. It sounds hard, but it's not. It's just dabbing in some pigment ink over the top of it with a cotton ball, right? But let's add this in first. Okay, so these are some gulls here. I have flock or something like that. I don't know if I would add ducks or geese or something like that, but kind of, you know, some birds flying up in the sky. Isn't that kind of a nice touch? It's subtle like that. It suddenly gives us, you know, an additional thing in this given space. Okay, and I should get a new cotton ball. I've been using this one for a while, but let's go ahead and use it. All right. White pigment ink. Now watch this. This is going to be key. And I might get it wrong too. I'm just dabbing it in. I'm not squeezing it into there. So I just get... Let's see how much I got on there. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's very light, right? See that right there? Don't smash it down like, oh my god, I can't see it. you know, and so you go like that, right? You kind of want a nice light application of it. Maybe that's too light here. I need some more. I usually take in too much, but all right. See that right there? Watch this right here. 1, 2, 3. Barely anything showing, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. There's your glow. It took me 20 taps, okay? I mean, 20 taps takes like, you know, 3 to 5 seconds, so it's not like, oh my gosh, this is going to take forever. No. Okay, so where do I add this? I'm going to add that in that light area, okay? And I just kind of start dabbing it in like that. It's not showing up very much because it already is light in there, but it's just making it a little bit lighter. But I'll show you what it does to those gulls that I stamped at. Doesn't it look like they're floating off, you know, flying off into the sun or into that sunlight? It's because they're lighter, right? It's because I tapped over it with some white pigment ink, so it's a little bit more translucent. There's this translucent layer of that pigment ink in there. All right, so let's bring some of this down too. See that where the meeting of land and sky take place? Oh, let me see if I can get down there a little bit more. Now talk about kind of a fun lighting technique. Now if it's really dark up here, we can't do that, but we can kind of do this right here because I've left this area light, right? Or, you know, somewhat light, but even if I didn't, I can kind of tone it back like this. All right, I need more chill. But you can see where that line between kind of land and sky is starting to get a little bit more diffused, and what we're doing is we're putting, what are we doing here? We're putting light on the landscape, right? We're illuminating it. What we're saying is there's kind of moisture in the air, and that light is illuminating that moisture. So we're talking about a sympathy card, right? You know what I mean? So you're kind of putting, you know, there's less of a definitive distinction, a hard edge between kind of heaven and earth, right? Or that's what it can kind of represent. And that's where kind of we get this feeling maybe of serenity. What is that in terms of at least this scene right here? It's kind of this diffusion of areas in here. So look at that. Look at that over here. Doesn't that look really illuminated? Doesn't look like it's the light kind of shining off of that now? And what was it? It's just dabbing in some pigment ink over the top of it. It's a really light shade of it, but let's put some of it into our bridge now. Okay. Look at that. Don't go crazy and just put a blob of, you know, paint over everything, but I think that, you know, I think that looks pretty good. Now let's put a little bit more kind of fog and this light, right, into this piece. Now, this person that stamped this out, she can just do this too and go back into her scene that she's already done, and it can kind of bring it around in many ways. There was a lot of harsh lines and whatever, but this, what does this do? It softens a lot of that, doesn't it? See, I'm putting some of it to my flowers as well. This is why I really wasn't too worried about kind of what things were looking like during the process. I mean, you know, you have to kind of consider it a little bit, but sometimes, you know, when you're doing all these different colors, they can kind of look a little bit unrelated, or very unrelated. But then you start putting these layers over the top of it, and it all starts to kind of come together. There's too much ink on this right now. Just kind of wipe it off a little bit. See that right there? And dab a little bit more lightly. Okay? But look how fun that is right there. And everyone has, you know, kind of, well, I don't know, maybe not everyone. I was going to say cotton balls in there. medicine cabinet, I don't know, under the sink, wherever in their drawer. Okay, let's put a little bit more of this pigment ink right down here, kind of at the end of the bridge. It's almost like this bridge is kind of the you know, where someone will bridge, you know, the verb bridge. Like that. Look at that now. I don't know, doesn't it look like more like a sympathy card to you now? You can do this in any color scheme too. Like if you know someone, you know what I mean, if someone passed away or something, and if, you know, kind of it was known their favorite color or whatever their favorite flower was known, you know, it would be completely kind of in theme with the, you know, card you might send to their loved ones, whoever you're sending that, you know, sympathy card to. All right, that's looking pretty good. Let's go a little bit more up here, okay? I think that's really looking nice up there. Like that. That really brought it together, didn't it? All right, so I noticed if you've been watching any of my latest videos, you might have seen things like these light beams like this done with pigment ink. This one's over photo stamping right here. But won't those, something like that, be really nice in a piece like this? All right, so how do we do that? It can't be any easier. I don't think. But let's take a point on this, okay? And I have it kind of flaring out from the same point. You can't do that like a beam out here. Like, let me zoom out here so I can show you this better. There's my sun. Don't do a beam over here, and then do a beam over here like that. I always have it kind of coming from kind of one source. So I'm just kind of picking the middle of my sun like this. I don't know. It might not be exact, but you know, we'll try to make it emanating from the same point. All right, now I'll just use the same Q-tip right here. All right, so there's this little light beam like that, and let's go over here. Now here's the thing that I think is kind of effective. Don't do them the same intensity, okay? Come around here like this, maybe do this one a little bit lighter. Like that. That one wasn't too much lighter. But it still looks pretty good though, I think. Okay, now let me try to go lighter on this. I'll taper it, okay? I'll show you what I mean by that actually. Okay, so there. Alright, so taper it. A little bit more ink right here. Kind of towards my sun is right down here. Here, let me work up here a little bit more. Alright, my sun is right there. Alright? Adding some ink and then tapping lighter up here so it kind of transitions from lighter to darker out here. Okay, alright, so let's go with something like that. Something like that. It just kind of disappears down there, like so. Let's do another one out here, kind of on this side. I normally wouldn't do so much like this, okay, with this, but just in the spirit of the, you know, the card, the purpose of it, you know, I'm kind of going with a little bit more kind of a, I don't know, brilliance or whatever. I'm not using brilliance, the pad, the ink pad. You know, that's another type of white ink, pigment ink. But anyway, you get something like that. I mean, you can have some go behind the horizon too if you want to, or coming out here. Something like that would be kind of nice. All right, now what I was going to do on this scene, it looks pretty good to me, but sometimes I still like a little bit of foreground on here to just kind of frame things off a touch. I was thinking about some reeds like this, which could be stamped down here. I wasn't quite sure if I want to go with something that sharp, though. Okay, I might want something a little bit of a softer touch to it, like these in this branch right here from the oak branch. I think that would look good. I think kind of it would have us standing under something like a tree, and trees are kind of, you know, they stand for certain things, right? It's like life and growth and whatnot. Trees can be very regal and majestic, etc., etc. All right, I'm just going to do this in black, or maybe I should do that in my VersaFine black. Let me do it in the VersaFine just to be safe. It's a thicker ink and should stamp right on over my pigment ink that I've already laid down. So pigment on pigment sometimes stands out better than dye on pigment. Sometimes dye-based inks on pigment don't really stamp out very well. So, all right, let's put one right here. This will have us kind of standing underneath the tree too, okay? But I think it'll kind of frame off the top of this really nicely. Okay, see that? It kind of frames things too. It kind of creates this, it sets this up as kind of more of a, like a passageway too. Again, kind of, you know, I mean, I think it looks good anyways, but kind of within the spirit of this piece too. Look at that. Let's come up with another little piece right over here too. Like it's overhanging. You know, we have a lot of growth, and this tree is very healthy. See that now? Doesn't it kind of push the viewer's eye up that way? Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm not going to put a little yellow in there, okay? It would be too dark. Sometimes if someone colors like light beams yellow, because you're thinking light is yellow, which is fine, but if you color something yellow, what you do have to do is you have to make the whole area around it darker, because suddenly you've made the light beams darker than white. So if you have a bunch of white in here, you know, you're saying that the actual light source is darker than that white, okay? All right, so that is that. Let's get into some little things here. I can hit this with some little specks of lighting in here. Maybe I should have done that before I did the pigment ink. Sometimes the gel pens don't write on the pigment ink really well. I think we'll get away from it because I think my pigment ink is really quite thin. Maybe not. Maybe I added a lot. Now what this pen is doing is it's kind of digging down through that ink. We'll see if we can do it. I need my Uniball 1.0. This is a 0.7. I need a 1.0. A little bit of a thicker dot would be good. Anyways, what I'm doing is I'm kind of adding in some little highlights in here. If we darken the shadows, what you can do is you can illuminate the highlights. Well, where are the highlights in a scene? Well, like on this piece of wood right here, we have the shade down here, so the light would be up top here, right? Shade right here, light on top. You can hit, you know, some of these flowers in here where they're a little bit more illuminated. But let's go in here and try to bring out some of this line. I can't do too much because I'm kind of digging into a lot of my pigment ink. No, I didn't use any pigment ink down here, so it's taken this pretty good. But see, when I put this highlighting on top, it looks a little bit more three-dimensional, doesn't it? Highlight the lights, darken the shadows, okay? That's the difference between just coloring space and coloring for lighting. It means you just don't approach the whole thing exactly the same. You vary it a little bit. Kind of adding a little bit of texture into this wood too. There's some of these rocks down here. Rocks are usually top lit, so I can put a little highlight on the top of them. Makes them look a little bit more dimensional, doesn't it? Go into your flowers, okay? There's yellow gel pens that would look fantastic down here. You can use some of those, or that color. Color some of them in. Remember to vary it a little bit. And put a little bit of light down here, a little shimmer, you know, in the form of these dots. Okay. I really like this card. I've never used quite so much pigment ink before with like a cotton ball, you know, and making this illumination right there, but I think it looks pretty good. Especially, like I said, for the the purpose of it, the sympathy aspect of it. I'm just adding a little bit more down here. I thought that would look kind of nice. It kind of makes the whole thing seem a little bit more dreamy looking, I think, in kind of this illuminated light. Pigment ink often dries darker than what it looks like, from being freshly applied. So I'm just adding some more of it down just to kind of create another coat of it. Alright, so that is that. And one of the things I really love doing is this little splatter paint application. And I was joking around with someone that I think it looks great on everything, and I would apply it. I'm thinking about just, I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking about applying it to anything, and I said, maybe I don't even care what it's supposed to represent. I usually have it representing things like splashing water, stars in the sky, fireflies, whatever. But if we're doing it something in a setting that's, just high noon or whatever, I thought, well, maybe it's pollen in the air. Just, I don't know. It's, it's blossoms, floating through the air or whatnot. This is your Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's opaque white watercolor paint, and it's quite opaque, so it's really perfect for this application because it goes over everything and it dries really fast. And you can get a pretty cool looking technique or texture out of it. So we'll call this kind of like some blossoms in the wind or something like that. Pollen, whatever. If you have allergies, we'll call it, just little blossoms. Okay, so that's what that's going to look like right there. Okay? Oops, I got a little blob there, but if that's things like that happen, it's fine too. Alright, do you see how that's happening right there? Alright, let's take a look and see what it'll look like on here. You won't be able to see it too much in this area because it's really light anyway. It's really quite subtle, especially where it's going over those lighter things within that given space. Alright, I think that I don't want to go overboard with it, but I'll show you what it looks like there. See that? It's subtle in here because it is so, like, if I did it in a dark paper nighttime sky type of thing, it would be very apparent, but here, you see what it did? Can you see it right out here and whatnot? You can see it really, you know, if I go really close in, there's a big blob of it right there. I can just wipe that out if I want to, but I think it's fine. It's coming out here, it's like this light beads or something like that coming out towards us, so I think that will do it. Nothing else really comes to mind. It wouldn't be bad to put like a little deer in there or something like that. Sometimes things like that represent kind of peace and whatnot. You put an animal in there and it's just standing there. It's not afraid of us as a viewer. I don't think it needs it. You know, I think the birds up there are just fine too, but I don't know, you know, like a little deer or something like that in the background would be interesting. If I did it, I would stamp it out and let it dry, and then I would put some of that tone over the top of it so that it is amongst the mist and whatnot, but I do think this is fine as is too, though. Let's add a little bit more of that to that. But look at that lighting right there, huh? So, okay, so do you see what I mean here? Now, I mean, this took a little bit of time. I mean, I can work it a little bit faster. I'm kind of coming up with these things on the fly, too. But here's my general kind of point about this scene. All right? It's kind of coloring with a purpose, okay? It's not just coloring to fill space. This green grass up here, do you see where it's darker on the outside edges and a little bit lighter? Now it's really light because I put that pigment ink all over the top of it, but just in general we have darker and lighter in here because that's my light source area, okay? And I stamp it in the color that you know, those shapes are going to be. So if I have blue clouds or a blue sky, I am stamping those clouds in blue, okay? And then I added in some additional tones in there. Green grass, okay, but the green grass had colors from the sky and bridge, okay? Browns in the greens, blues in the greens. Lighting on this, it's not just coloring the whole thing, all that color brown everywhere. If we did that, it would look like this darkness, right? And it wouldn't have that illumination coming off of it. So now we have that light influencing the grass and influencing this area. Now, all that means, it doesn't have to be a complicated type of concept. All you have to do is retain some areas of light within your darker space on each object or space that you're working in, okay? These flowers right here, I can probably give it a little bit more variation. I could make some of these a little bit darker, and that would probably look good, you know, or even better. But I think it looks good, but they're not all the same value or intensity of yellow. Do you see this? Some of them are a little bit brighter, where I've, you know, took in that, you know, brighter, darker yellow, right? And then I kind of blended them out a little bit, but I do have some greens in there, but just so it doesn't look so separated. Actually, let's hit this. This is a yellow gel pen. Let's hit some little sparkles off here on the side in a color related to that color scheme in here. So we've kind of put some additional yellow flowers in our surrounding area, like so. So what I'm doing is I'm carrying out this yellow flower idea into the surrounding area. Okay, and I'll go like so. Alright, so that's what that did. I put some little yellow up in these areas right around here. Okay? Anyway, so that kind of finished things off in terms of the tighter details really nicely. Okay, so lighting versus coloring. It's not really so much. It's kind of using coloring to define lighting, really more so. But in terms of the mental approach, it's just not coloring everything uniformly. And again, I think this really works in the spirit of both light, and that's the thing that I think. I think the composer of this piece was thinking about in terms of a sympathy card. I think that's the thing that was missing a little bit, is they just didn't retain some areas of light throughout their different areas. I think they could just, as seen just how good this worked, I think they can just go right into that piece that they did and just start to define it a little bit more and to bring out those light areas again through the use of the white pigment ink over the tops of those areas that became too dark. All right, because their composition looks really good. It just didn't retain those areas of lightness. Everything kind of got just colored in uniformly with kind of darker values. All right. So, anyways, hope you like this video. Hope you like the scene. I certainly enjoyed doing the scene. And I don't know if anyone else has any requests. I have to do another cloud stamp video where someone's asked about that, but if anyone has any kind of specific questions about certain types of compositions or, you know, particular designs, they can certainly make that request, and I'll try to get around to it in a video format. So thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning into the channel. If you like this video, hope you like, share, and subscribe.